Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
So, question of the audience: how can you use AI to improve your customer experience without losing the human touch? That's exactly what Colin will unpack in this episode. He'll share how businesses of any size can turn complex AI tools into simple, human centered solutions that create real impact. From contact center integration and intelligent agents to knowledge retrieval and data sovereignty, we'll reveal practical ways to harness AI innovation beyond the hype. And our guest today is Colin Mackenzie, and he's a seasoned AI applications innovator who spent over 3 decades turning complex tech into tools that feel simple and human. From building early hospital networks to shaping global multimedia services, he's led major advances in cloud communications and artificial intelligence. His work includes filed patents in multimedia tech, teaching advanced computer science, and guiding organizations through the shifts to cloud, automation, and now generative AI. Colin focuses now on intelligent agents, contact center integration, knowledge retrieval, and data sovereignty. That's going to be an interesting one. We're going to talk about that. And with always an eye on making customer experiences smarter and more meaningful. He's known for blending deep technical insight and practical wisdom. He's a trusted voice at conferences, workshops worldwide. Outside of tech, Colin loves to travel and once toured as a professional musician. Colin, welcome, sir. How are you? And do you have a favorite quote or saying you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'm a philosophy fan, so I like that one quote from Socrates. The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. But anyway, I like it because it's, sort of about intellectual humility, being curious and open and instead of thinking that you have all the answers. And coincidentally enough, speaking of travel, I was actually lucky enough to visit Delphi in Greece a few weeks ago, which is where Socrates started off his journey of questioning. Might have been thousands of years ago, but, it still kind of feels just as relevant today as it was then.
No hemlock for you?
Not today.
No, that's all right. So it's interesting to hear someone talk about blending the human connection and cutting edge technology. And, every once in a while you see something new coming up and going, how's that work? And usually it's the prototype and the one that leaves a few cuts and edges and bruises until you get to the final, end good result. What drew you into that space? What made you go, the user experience?
Well, I've always been sort of fascinated by the intersection of people and technology. My first roles were in hospitals, which are less about machines and, more about how to connect people together better, doctors, nurses, patients, so technology is just the enabler in that context. So I think that carried through my career, whether it's multimedia, cloud, or AI, the question is still always, how can this make life easier, more human, more connected?
There is a lot of people talking about AI that don't have a clue what they're talking about. What are some of the misconceptions that you've seen that you'd like to clarify for us?
Well, there's a couple that I always sort of look at a little bit sideways. There's the idea that AI is going to take over everything like Skynet or the other end that it's just hype. The truth, of course, is always somewhere in the middle. It's powerful, but only when it's applied, thoughtfully. I think another one is that AI is magic. It's not. It's math, it's data, it's models. Without guardrails, context, and integration, it can be as wrong as it is right.
It's interesting. We've had conversations before this podcast, and you were explaining to me that it's almost like the genie in the bottle. In a tiny space, big universe can come out. And the reason I know it's right out of Aladdin from Disney, and but you've described something that you were explaining how AI can fit inside your phone, cruise around with, and yet it has a lot of capacity. And for me, prior to that moment, I always thought there had to be this large server farm breathing fire, to make this come together. And you're just telling me it's right in your computer. It's a little small. You can have a large language model kind of cooking and baking for you. What's behind that?
Well, like I said, it's not magic. It's just math, data, and models, right? Again, you get into the math side and you can have a number with 10 decimal points. You can have a number with 3 decimal points. You're just kind of changing the precision of it a little bit. But as you can imagine, the the less absolute you make the numbers, the more of them you can kind of fit into any given space. So, I mean, they've done some phenomenal work in the last couple of years of taking these big, huge monolith LLM, generative AI models, the chat GPTs of the world, and shrinking them using some clever math. I mean, things like precision rounding of numbers and stuff like that, but basically getting them into a footprint that can fit on your phone. So a lot of the new phones that are coming out, the new operating system updates, they're literally including LLM models that are similar to the chat GPTs of the world that you're seeing out in the cloud, but they're working on device and on phones. Which is not only, I think, great from, it's obviously very responsive. You can get answers to stuff really quickly, but I think beyond even the technical capabilities it gives you, there's a huge advantage just to privacy, the ability that to have something done on device where it doesn't have to go out to the cloud, having all that data sort of travel around the cloud and get absorbed into everybody's data centers and resucked into training the next model. There's something that I think is a good sort of step for the industry to take, because there's always a little bit of a trust issue when it comes to, where's my data really going? So keeping it on device is a valuable thing from that point of view as well.
So how do you keep things secure when it goes back into an LLM?
Well, I mean, so first of all, by having something on device, it never has to actually leave the device. So that's obviously one way, but I mean, that is one of the risks. Like, that's one of the areas that that came up about data sovereignty before. There is a challenge with when people are using these, again, the chat GPTs of the world, these generative AI services. You're throwing stuff up into the cloud. That content, you might have thought it was private, but maybe it includes some kind of personal information. Maybe it includes some patient care, some proprietary company information. That's now all gone out into the cloud, and that can then be used to sort of reinvest in training the next model down the road. But there are approaches that can mitigate that. So, I mean, one of the main ones is, you can pay a little bit more for licensing. So you pay a higher monthly fee instead of a lower one, get a enterprise account, so to speak. And you get a guarantee that the data that you submit is going to be kept private and not used in that way. But what a lot of companies are moving towards is a little bit more of that kind of that really private data sovereignty approach, where they'll basically install their own models. They'll basically get their own servers and their own data centers. They'll install their own kind of AI engine to shovel all of this stuff through, and then it never actually has to leave their data center in the first place. It doesn't even go out to the cloud. Obviously, there's more work and effort involved in doing something like that than just taking advantage of the things that are out there all in the cloud. But a lot of companies are starting to find that because customers don't always trust AI unless they trust how their data is being handled. And it's not just the customer or the company side, but regulators around the world are starting to catch up and demand that as well. So sometimes it's even a compliance requirement, not just a nice to have.
I find very interesting that I like to talk to professionals about. If you are 60 years old, you've seen a telephone tree where you saw technology being used against you to try to actually talk to a human that could help you. Now that we have billions of dollars worth of hardware and some very, very smart minds, what do you think is actually going to be implementable and makes life better instead of just different?
Well, I mean, I think that comes into the conversation around why are you automating things in the first place if you're trying to make the customer experience better? I mean, obviously people are trying to maybe reduce costs. They're trying to push things to a self-service, maybe an AI agent, because it's cheaper than a human person to be on the end of the phone. But at the end of the day, the customer service has to drive that. So it shouldn't be the case that people are kind of forced into that model where they have to talk to an AI agent. It should be more about, where do you draw the line with the right kinds of things? What are the right low-hanging fruit where it makes sense to do something where maybe, a user or a customer would rather just get some piece of information quickly. They just want to get an account balance or something like that really fast. Do that automated, move those things to an automated model where AI can help, but then keep the more relationship building sides or areas where a customer really wants to have a conversation or a connection, or when that's important to have that established with your users. Keep those things with because a human being does clearly much better at that. So I think it's more about where you draw the line as a company to the kinds of things where you want to use automation to improve. Use it for the low hanging fruit where somebody just wants a quick answer. Don't use it to try and replace the sort of authentic, customer connections that I think are valuable for all companies.
You mentioned something earlier about AI being in-house, right? And needing servers. But some of the utility of having AI is being able to pick up information that's not in the house because it's out in the wild, right? Whether you're referencing Wikipedia, which is not necessarily accurate, or there's another data set out there that's more reputable. Not that Wikipedia isn't reputable, but it's more verified. How do you take the two sets of information? So like one internal data, which is company secrets and company process, versus what's out there so that you can pick up the best of both worlds. Is that something that's doable?
Absolutely doable. Yeah. So I guess there's maybe two ways of answering that. One might be information that's out in the world. And I think one of the nice things is that a lot of the models that even if you want to deploy something to keep it private, you want to do something on premise or in a data center and kind of keep everything sort of walled off from the rest of the world, you're still basically leveraging models that have been trained on data sets using the outside world up until a certain point. So even if you go and install one of those today and you put it on a server in a data center, it still has a pretty comprehensive set of real world knowledge to draw from. But a lot of what's being done, and I think it's even an inherent thing with large language models to begin with, is they're not deterministic. So we've all seen and heard about generative AI hallucinating, making stuff up. It does it very, very well. It's very convincing when it does, but there's always going to be scenarios like that where it's not just a technical issue. I mean, in a lot of cases, you have to be able to trust that some of the information that you're relying on is not just made up or generated out of an LLM, but it's grounded in that real world knowledge source. And what a lot of people have been doing on that is basically combining different sets of information. There's a common acronym called a RAG pipeline, a retrieval augmented generation, which is basically a way of saying, hey, somebody's asking a question. Why don't I take that question and then look in dip into my real world knowledge source first, and then go and figure out based on the things that I found there. Now, how do I put these pieces together, maybe synthesize it, put it into a nice answer to send out. So it's kind of a blending between traditional generative AI, LLMs, and knowledge sources, which, there's kind of newer technology that's being used to make that easier to store, easier to kind of ingest stuff into, and very, very quick and rapid to be able to get things out in a way that's usable in that kind of pipeline.
We've been hearing a lot in the last couple of years about AI, and there's everything from it's going to create an underclass where we're all going to be, starving and cold, and the other is we're going to be doing so well and be so productive. We'll have people feeding us grapes as somebody plays the loon on our island. In medium term, 3 years or less, what do you see actually happening versus what people are saying in either of those two ditches?
Well, I mean, it does go back to my comment about, how sometimes you have people that are thinking that it's going to be one extreme or the other, and it's not going to be Skynet and it's not just hype. The answer is always, somewhere in the middle. But I think, I think the reality is that AI is a tool. So, I mean, even in the next couple of years, it's not about replacing everything. It's not about replacing people's jobs. It's really more about augmentation. So, I mean, if we think about this like in a customer service kind of world, how do you help somebody find an answer faster if they're on the phone with somebody, or draft a response, or how do you make a self-service interaction more conversational? So it's really about kind of augmenting what people are doing in the short term. And, I mean, in the long term, I mean, there's newer technologies that will get more autonomous and be more able to help kind of, automate more sort of aspects of what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. But it goes back to that human connection. You're never going to replace that. It's more about replacing the low-hanging fruit that people don't necessarily want to do, that it's repetitive, and then pushing, businesses and users a little bit more to, have the customer connection and the personal connection on the things where it matters, where it's complicated, where you need to build those relationships together. And if somebody just wants to find out your business hours or get an account balance or things like that, sure, leverage technology to do that. I think those are the areas that it will take more and more of. It'll become part of the ecosystem a little bit more thoroughly.
Right now, most people, when you mention AI, they think of one of three things. They go, "Hey," and pick the name. I'd say it right now, but I get a prompt back, right?
We all would,
That's
yeah.
oh no, they're all talking together. That, or you think of I've got to put a question in, and I got to do some prompt engineering, which means there's a kind of a chatter or a chatbot. But I think there's a lot more under the hood. Where else is AI making an actual impact, positive impact, and kind of where's it going next? Is my car going to know? Oh, Bernie, you've come back to the car. Yeah. I've unlocked the door for you. I recognized your footsteps, Padawan.
Well, there is, I mean, it may do that too, but there is, I think there's some really cool areas where it's going. I mean, we have gone from a world where, AI was used to do little bits and pieces here or there. It was almost like little spot technology fixes in places. It's become a little bit more prevalent, through areas like conversational AI and bots, the generative AI, the chat GPTs of the world, and everything that our devices will answer for us are getting smarter and smarter. But I think the more interesting direction is some of the things that are starting to come out around what's called agentic AI. So to me, that's kind of the cool thing that's coming up in the future. I mean, it's here now, but it's not maybe as prevalent. And so I think what's really cool about that is, we're dealing with systems that aren't just responding, you're not just asking a question and getting an answer back. They're not just anticipating something, but they can act autonomously. So they can chain tasks together so they can solve a problem end to end. If they know that they have to do 5 things in a certain order to solve a problem for you, they can go off independently and do those 5 things and then come back after and say, hey, I've done this whole thing for you. I've solved it. And I think that's sort of a cool thing, especially like for smaller businesses as well. I mean, because it's just leveling the playing field. I mean, you could have, you can have an AI assistant that can handle more of the routine work at that level than you would have had otherwise. And so the owners are free to focus on trying to grow their business and relationships and stuff like that. But the agentic AI, I think, is the cool area and the direction that it's going in.
On the video, we can see a whole bunch of guitars. So I'll ask you the musical question. Now that we have all this new technology and we have things like auto-tune, and we're all romantic about what happened in 1966, is this technology improving us, destroying us, letting us pick more carefully? Where are we?
Yes, all of the above. Yeah. So it is, and it's very interesting as well. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's in the news about even artists, where the entire food chain of writing and recording a song is in some cases being done automatically and AI driven. So it's, I mean, those are some sort of extreme examples of where AI is starting to kind of infiltrate the music business a little bit. And sometimes you can't even necessarily trust exactly what you're hearing. I may be a little old fashioned in that sense because, I had a musical background, and as a performer and a writer, I know I'm going to sound like I'm walking uphill both ways to school in the snow, but I remember it back when it was tough. You had to learn an instrument, you had to learn how to sing, you had to write songs, you had to record it. So it's not to say that there isn't clearly a benefit of having technology. I'm still pretty involved in that industry, and I know folks that are still recording artists, and they're able to still be creative, but they're able to put something together in a matter of days versus weeks or months. And so that's phenomenal. I mean, as an enabler, technology can really help, but there is a risk that it can go a little bit too far. And there's a risk that there could be a trust sort of issue. You mentioned autotune. I mean, that's a perfect example. I actually have a good friend. I used to teach guitar lessons back in the old days as well. And I had a guitar student who's now, he's a big Nashville artist. He does session guitar playing, and he's toured around the world as well, and has his own writing. And I remember hearing a story where they would go into a Nashville studio and they wouldn't even record people without autotune being on in the listening environment, because they didn't actually care how the track sounded when it went on tape. They cared how the track sounded going on tape through autotune. So I remember hearing about that, that it was a little disheartening that it was so pervasive that they, it was just a given that it was going to be part of the, that it was going to be part of the signal chain. But so it can go a little bit too far that it can be relied on as a crutch. But I think there is still an aspect to AI and music where there are some commonalities. Yeah, I mean, if you think about music, it's, both of them are deeply rooted in math, harmony, rhythm, timing. There's lots of overlaps between music and AI on a good day anyway. But you have all these areas where, you can benefit from the technology. There are overlaps for sure. I mean, even from a creative point of view, you're dealing with kind of listening and adapting and creating things in real time. I mean, they're not totally dissimilar sort of areas and fields, but if they're relied on as a crutch versus as a tool to help drive creativity, I think maybe that's where some of the more spirited debate comes from.
Interesting enough, it's a tool, and I get that piece. After watching tradesmen doing a house reno here, I'm going, I can do that, and I already know the answer is yeah, I can do it, but it'll look like a dog's breakfast when it's done, laying tiles on the floor. How does a business know when they're looking at an AI tool? Yeah, I can do that. Is there like a sandbox environment you kind of test it out in, and then you unleash it to the wild? Is there, when do you know it's too much? Like whether it's a interactive, like a chatbot on a website, or it's part of the phone tree system going, "Hello, Mr. Smith," and "Yes, Mr. Anderson." Having that dialogue, right? No matrix jokes here at all. But where do you find that you kind of like use enough of the tool to benefit, but at the same time stay authentic to the task, stay authentic with the client?
Well, I mean, I think that goes to what I was mentioning before, that the human connection is important in any company, in any business. So, I mean, it's important to retain that. So I think what that comes down to is, any business should be looking at, what are the areas where it makes sense to do something, where it makes sense to invest in. And, I mean, the best starting point is to look at things that are going to save time. I mean, are there back office tasks that can be automated, invoicing, scheduling, things like that? There's no real value from a business point of view of doing that work manually versus having it more automated. So those are great places of applying, AI as tools to be able to sort of help you do that, because it just acts as a, kind of like a force multiplier. But I think, you mentioned chatbots, I think that's another area where customer facing automation that leverages AI, really what it's going to come down to is just going to help a company be more responsive. I mean, if it's trained properly and has the right guardrails in there, it can respond to something instantly instead of maybe having to wait minutes or hours for somebody to get back manually. So even a small chatbot that can answer FAQs well is going to make a smaller business look bigger and more professional. And so, those are, I think, good areas where it makes sense to, kind of look at those things as investments, because you're either going to save time or you're going to help be more responsive, maybe look a little bit bigger than you are by having a better, more polished sort of customer presence. I mean, I think those are the things that can make a difference.
You said something just a second ago, guardrails. And, is that something that is the business? Is that something the company that's setting up the AI the components? And just what is a guardrail? What is it meant to do? And if it fails, how terrible can it be?
Well, I mean, you can ask Microsoft and some of the companies that have not done historically a terribly good job putting guardrails up and had AI bot experiments publicly fail just in a colossal fashion. They're important for sure. I think I made the comment before about trust when we were talking about data sovereignty. And I think that trust is maybe one of the aspects where that comes in. But like I was saying before, you've got large language models that aren't deterministic. They can hallucinate. They can say stuff that isn't true. So it's important to kind of ground it in real world knowledge, like we were talking about before. But there's also other areas that can come in as well. I mean, you can have bias in terms of how models are trained. If the data used to train a model has bias, the outputs are going to have a bias as well. So that can affect trust. There's been stories about law firms using, AI to do, sort of legal cases, hiring, banks doing it in terms of lending, how customers are treated, so that can affect fairness. When we talk about guardrails, I think that's part of where that comes in. So it's not just about tying in actual real knowledge and real sources, but it's about trying to put kind of parameters around it so that the kinds of things that come out in terms of outputs are accurate, are appropriate, and are fair. And those are typically done, I mean, especially with generative AI, I mean, those are typically done by any kind of larger generative AI system. And they're done under the hood with the ChatGPTs of the world and the systems that we all use on a day-to-day basis as well. Those guardrails exist in there. They're part of the system prompts that are intended to, again, to keep the outputs accurate and fair. And especially when we're talking about a business that might be leveraging things, you want to make sure that it's appropriate. You want to make sure that those guardrails include what is the voice of the company? How do I what's the voice that I want to project to a customer when I'm speaking to them, and to keep any output or any generative results kind of lined up with that barometer.
If you read business press and you hear about Sam Altman and Microsoft and Google and Meta and what they're talking about, the numbers they're using are all phone numbers. I mean, they're not where SMEs are, small, medium. Where is this going to the electrician, the plumber, the window and door salesman? When is that going to mutate down to the guy with the cell phone and the laptop in the truck?
Well, and I mean, I think to some degree, maybe that goes into what Bernie was mentioning before about having AI that's resident in our phones. I think some companies, I think Apple is a good example of it. I think some companies like OpenAI are using generative AI very, very publicly as a platform. Come here and ask ChatGPT a question and I will give you an answer. But I think other companies, Apple, Google, anybody that has, devices and operating systems, I think even Microsoft is an example of that. They're trying to figure out how to kind of integrate it in to help solve problems, so it's less about having a specific answer. There's been lots of fanfare around how some of the AI will get more intelligent and help people. For example, things like being able to ask my phone, hey, I think my mother's flying in. Can you tell me if the plane is going to be on time and what time I have to leave here to be able to get there on time to pick her up? So, I mean, that's a good example where it goes certainly beyond a straightforward question. It's now asking questions that matter to kind of normal people. It's integrating personal information and personal context, and it's helping connect a lot of dots on their device to do something a little bit more normal, a little bit more human. Hey, I need to get in the car and go and drive and pick up my mother at the airport. Help me do that and help me not be late. So I think there's lots of examples like that where some companies are approaching it as a platform that stands alone by itself. But I think a lot of other companies are working really hard to try and get it, I think, out to, more of the layman. I just need a thing on how do I use this stuff on a day-to-day basis to make my life a little bit easier. And hopefully that's pervasive across the board to anybody. It's not exclusive to the tech.
So if you're out hunting information and you ask a particular AI platform for an answer and you're looking at it going, how do I know the veracity? Unless of course you're asking what's 2 plus 2, right? And you're getting 4 and you're looking down and you're getting 4.9, then something's going on. But you're asking a complex question. Say it's a medical question. And not that you're going to, base it on the response back, but if you wanted to cross-reference it, would you ask another AI platform the same question and see if the answers pair up? In other words, there's two separate LLMs hard at work, and you're going, Well, look, they match.
Well, certainly a lot of people do that. They'll have LLMs fighting each other and trying to come up to the right answer in tandem. And if they end up at the same place and knocking on the same door, then that's probably a good answer. I think certainly from a business point of view, I think the way more people tend to approach that problem is more with that, like I said, that combination of guardrails and kind of augmented knowledge retrieval. So there's technical ways that people tend to do that. They'll use, vector stores, vector databases, and take all of their company stuff and sort of throw it into basically a little database, but one that's kind of geared around, semantic searches and not, more literal searches. And they can tie that into a pipeline that generative AI can feed off of. And so they use that to kind of balance the real world stuff. So typically today, if you're talking, if you're just using ChatGPT, you might have to fight it out with another chat query. But the companies that are doing this, that are incorporating, again, whether it's health information or other things, in most cases, they're taking that query and then cross-referencing it typically with context about the individual that they're referring to. So they have real-world context that actually has information about them specifically. And then they typically have knowledge that's coming out of effectively like a knowledge store. You can think of it like a big knowledge database where they're using that to kind of cross-reference and keep sort of the guardrails on that conversation to keep it kind of within factual bounds to make sure that it's accurate. So that's a sort of a common way that people are guaranteeing it today. But if you just ask ChatGPT, although the guardrails are starting to get better and the accuracy is getting better, they clearly make a point of highlighting lower, accuracy or higher accuracy, lower hallucinations, every time they do an update. To be honest, it's always still a bit of a coin flip and a Wild West in terms of whether you can 100% guarantee. You don't want to always bet the farm on the answer.
If a person is capitalizing on the AI, will they feel better off, or will they feel like, is it a crutch or is it aid?
I think in a lot of cases, as long as it's used properly and used kind of consistent with what I said before, try and automate the sort of the grunt work, the low hanging fruit, the repetitive tasks. If I was somebody that was sitting at a contact center, if I was an agent that was on the end of a phone answering it, it would get a little repetitive to keep saying our business hours are 9 to 5. Our business hours are 9 to 5. That can get a little bit repetitive. So I think being able to leverage it to do those kinds of things, I think being able to leverage it to do things like help them do sort of quick lookups of information when somebody calls, because there's a business benefit to that too. If you can kind of shorten the time that somebody is on a call, and that's better for the customer and it's better for the agent, because people cost money. So there's benefits for the business, but I think the benefit for the sort of people that are working in the companies is that they don't get dragged into all these kind of low value repetitive tasks, and they can be a little bit more focused on the higher value stuff, a little bit more focused on things that have an actual, sort of customer connection. They're part of the company helping to sort of build its connection with people, as opposed to, feeling like they're just repetitively answering the same question 50 times in a row. I think in a lot of cases, they will find that it's a value, but it does depend on a company trying to implement it the right way. Implement the stuff not only that a customer may want to get quickly, but implement the stuff that agents or people that are doing the work don't necessarily want to have to do themselves, because it's kind of low value stuff.
There are people selling shiny objects, and there are people who think they can implement the shiny object. And they find out after spending a fair amount of money and time, they didn't even know the right questions to ask. What does the human consultant, salesperson, value added bring back to get them to a yes?
Yeah, I guess there's sort of two sides of it. I think one side is around, that there's sometimes a lack of knowledge about even knowing what questions to ask about AI, because it can be a little bit of a black box, it can be a little bit opaque, it's hard to sort of know what's in there. And as you said, there are people selling shiny objects, and, it seems like magic sometimes. So they come in and they seem like magicians. But I think for the people that are buying technology, they can ask more practical questions. They don't have to understand the math. They just need to kind of look at the outcomes. Look, where's the training data coming from this? I mean, what are you doing to prevent kind of bias or hallucination and keep the results accurate? Can you show me some real world results with other customers, that are like us, for how your thing performs, So I think there's better questions that they can ask around how that works. But I think there's also, for the people that are selling the technology, I think you mentioned an important kind of aspect, which is a lot of times it's positioned as a silver bullet. And that's, I think, a little problematic sometimes because it's not. It's, I think the best way that both people selling technology and people that are trying to implement technology, I think the best way for them to look at it is, experiment, start small, experiment and measure the results. Treat AI like it's a business experiment, not like it's a silver bullet. And get comfortable with a loop and a cadence. AI is far more about testing, measuring it, and adjusting. It's far less like, 20 years ago, if you had a big system, you'd spend a year or two in some big, long implementation. It would be done. You'd close it and you'd run out that thing for 10, 15 years, and that was the end of it. AI systems are typically not like that in terms of how they're implemented. I mean, there's an ongoing cadence and tuning that goes into it, at least certainly in the successful implementations. And so I think when it's sold as a silver bullet, or when it's even viewed as a silver bullet by the people that are buying it, I think there's a much more productive way of approaching it than that. Think of it like a journey, not like a destination.
As long as we don't have a werewolf, we'll be good, because then the silver bullet will have to come out. Do you have a
all of them?
Or is it a task specific?
I think it's, I think the not joking answer is it's always task specific. There are some like, like the open AIs of the world that are really good for cloud related, they're going to be sort of on the forefront of what's going on for sort of paid models. They have really good, kind of API endpoints that can allow you to automate things, not just use it like ChatGPT. They have aspects that can allow you to do some agentic kind of workflows. They have,
Agentic. How's that word?
It's a color. Wayne, it's a color. Sorry, that's bad.
So so you have the ability to kind of leverage it to do workflows where it's able to work more autonomously. So it can work in a loop. It can look at a problem, it can break the problem down into chunks, and then it can kind of go through that process, iteratively, autonomously, and chain tasks together until it can solve the problem. So companies like OpenAI and others have, they have APIs that can do those kinds of things as well. They also have models that can do things like text to speech. You want to generate some really good quality human speech for a transcription, for anything else. It'll do those kinds of things as well. So those kinds of companies, I think, are great in the open cloud space. They're not necessarily always the companies that you would go to if you're doing something premise-based, or you want to leverage something that's open source, if it needs to be, an offline kind of air-gapped model. Common open source ones, Facebook is actually fairly prominent. They've funded the open source Llama LLM models. Mistral is another one that's very common. So, depending on what area that you're looking at, if it's cloud, if it's prem, you might have different tools for the job, and different vendors have different strengths. And I think one of the really cool things is, as we're sometimes seeing in the news, there's always, a news report every month or two about somebody like DeepSeek and some of these companies that are coming out with, crazy innovative models that turn the entire industry on its head. And I think that's one of the really interesting areas of this area is it's kind of democratized. One of the benefits of people, leveraging open source tools and algorithms and technology is that they're all building on each other. And then every once in a while, you get these really incredible kind of leapfrogs that the whole industry goes, oh, I think we're going to turn right instead of left. This is really cool.
So if somebody's coming along and they're going, oh my gosh, it's like shopping for a car. As we all know, that sometimes, if you have a knowledge base and you understand how the mechanics of the motor, the car works, versus, oh, that looks shiny and pretty. Who do you seek for sound advice? In other words, I'm a startup business. Now, maybe my funding is a little tight. I need to automate some process. I get that. I'm not afraid. I'm trying to make sure that I'm keeping my data sovereign to my side of the fence and protecting my client base. But at the same time, do you just come off the shelf and you plug and play, or who should be the person they should be reaching out to kind of coordinate? Yes, this is Mr. Smith, and you're Mr. Anderson. Let me guide you down the rabbit hole. That's way too matrixy. I apologize. But that said, what would you identify as a resource to guide you into a path? You might have some tech savviness to yourself, but you want to make sure you get it right at least somewhat close to the first time.
Yeah, I think there's always a benefit of leveraging people that have experience in the field just to help, guide you as to what's real. And, again, we're back to the hype, and that word has come up a couple of times. So, there's sometimes things are overhyped, sometimes they're underhyped. And so it's always, it's never a bad thing to have somebody with some kind of knowledge and experience to help at least kind of guide you through some of that process. But I do think I think I would still go back to what I was saying, that the tools are democratized enough that I think there are always some really easy areas and low-hanging fruit where people can start small and experiment a little bit and then just sort of see, hey, I think this might be an area. Sure, maybe I'm going to invest a little bit and maybe have somebody give me a hand on that. But we all have phones. We can all go to ChatGPT and type something. There is the technology, I think, is more pervasive than previous generations of technology, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Because it means it's more accessible to people. So I think before anybody invests in an expensive consultant, I think it's always worth playing around a little bit. Start small, experimenting, try and find out some area that might be a value, especially as a small, medium business owner that maybe doesn't have quite the annual budget for consulting as a large enterprise, and just get comfortable with it. And then at least you're going to be able to ask better questions.
If this made sense, if you're a listener and you wanted to get a better take, you want to understand a bit better without being talked down to, how do we get a hold of you?
Well, I think the link that you've got, going through LinkedIn is probably an easy a place as any to reach out. I know that's how a lot of us stay connected in the corporate world, so that's probably the simplest way.
Colin Mackenzie, I want to say thank you so much for being a guest today. You, Wayne Pratt, for being the co-host. And especially you, the Knack for Business listeners, because you know what, this makes it worthwhile sharing the knowledge. So Colin has been doing touring as a musician to pioneering hospital networks. He seeks harmony between creativity and innovation, and that's kind of the key. And he's working to ensure that AI-driven solutions remain meaningful and impactful, ethical, and deeply connected to your needs as a human being. You got a question for him? Reach out to him. He's an extremely solid person to talk to and reliable.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.